Hey guys, what's up? Today we're going to be reacting and going over the article from about 3 weeks ago that's getting a lot of buzz in the youth soccer space from The Athletic, entitled U.S. Soccer Has a New Vision for Development. And spoiler alert, I have thoughts. So let's go. So some of you actually might not even have seen this article. It's actually been behind a paywall, but it's really important we go through articles like this because this is the kind of article that pisses me off a little bit, because I just don't know, one, if this reporter really understands youth soccer. So I don't think he's really asking the right questions. And then a lot of what's being said here, we've heard before, number one, and really isn't going to solve anything. So the article begins with basically a profile of Matt Crocker. And if you don't know who Matt Crocker is, he is the United States sporting director. And he was hired in 2023. Since then, he has done a few things. He has hired a U.S. women's national coach and a U.S. men's national coach. His background is that he's Welsh, and he's done sporting director, technical director work at Southampton, as well as the English FA. So I'm not going to read this article word by word. I want to go through the big talking points and then give you my take. Matt Crocker starts out telling The Athletic that, we have had a decline in terms of our top players. So he's saying that from 2014 to now, on the women's side, there's been a decline in top 50 and top 250 players. And on the men's side, there's no top 50 players. So he says because of this, things must change. Now, where have we heard this before? He describes the United States soccer landscape as being disjointed, which it is. But the question is, why is it disjointed? And that's not a question this reporter really asked him. So it says that he took the position in April 2023, and then he took a year listening and learning about what happens at the youth level. And that's how he came up with a plan. The article does a really good job, painting this really impossible task that we have at hand, which this is the same narrative we hear every few cycles. It's so difficult to bring people together. It's so difficult to change youth soccer. Like, this article could have been written 8 years ago, and it would have had the same narrative. Crocker then basically shared his vision, and I'm going to quote this. A, quote, plan for changing and improving, hopefully, player development in this country. It goes on to say, his challenge and the riddle that no U.S. soccer executive has ever solved is implementing it at thousands of amateur clubs across an alphabet soup of youth soccer sanctioning organizations that he cannot control. No U.S. soccer executive has ever solved this problem because no U.S. soccer executive has ever wanted to solve this problem. We know what works in player development. It is not some complex riddle. Are there challenges in the United States? Of course there's challenges in the United States, but it is not some incredible mystery that we need Sherlock Holmes to come and solve. It goes on to say that Matt Crocker has thoughts on how a 13-year-old should train, how a 5-year-old should train, but the question is how to implement it. So here's the thing. You don't actually have to implement it. And that's the dirty secret here. If the system allows cream to rise to the top, the best practices happen. You don't have to invent them. Like the people who are doing it the best will develop the best players, and those teams will win more games. And, God forbid I say it, get promoted. Like this is how development happens and how you determine what clubs and what academies are actually doing a good job. But we have no meritocracy in this country to determine that. So it becomes just anybody's guess. Who's developing good players? Who's not? Is anybody developing any players? Because it doesn't matter. This is what U.S. soccer, MLS, whatever you want to call it, has always missed out. It doesn't have to be one guru to figure this out. Okay, we didn't need Ernie Stewart to figure it out. We didn't need Jurgen Klinsmann to figure it out. We don't need Matt Crocker to figure it out. If the system is set up a certain way, it figures itself out. Anyway, off the soapbox, it goes on to say that in the past, these U.S. soccer gurus would dictate to coaches. They talk about how the development academy, kind of blew up. And, a lot of people saying that U.S. soccer only comes in when they want to put a mandate down, which I think is probably true. But I would also suggest to you that a lot of coaches and clubs are looking for guidance. They're looking for leadership. Like they have to scramble and do everything on their own because they don't get support. So anyway, Matt Crocker wants to take a different approach. He wants to influence instead of dictate or tell. They go on to give a quote by Trish Hughes, who is apparently the commissioner of the Girls Academy. And she's saying it's educating and trying to pull people in to be a part of the process. And I just, again, think this totally misses the mark. And either Trish Hughes doesn't understand how this works, or she does and is fine with it just going the way it is. You don't need people to buy into any process. You need to set up a system that allows cream to rise and people who are doing the right things to actually benefit from doing those things. It then goes on to talk about, he was 7 months into the job and it felt very overwhelming. And again, talking about, the size of the country, which I do think is a valid concern. But it's not this incredible hurdle that we can't all get over. Yeah, we have a big country. Like that's one of the challenges, but so does Brazil. Brazil's pretty big too. And they seem to develop a ton of incredible youth players. Like, why is that? Why do these countries with nowhere near the level of resources and money produce way more top level players? It's what they're talking about has nothing to do with youth development, in my opinion. Or they're using it as an excuse. They also talk about England, because they're smaller, they work together. And I would disagree with that. I think, I'm not so sure they work together. I think they're rivals. And that rivalry and that system is actually what breeds great players. I want to read this quote now because this was an incredible use of word salad by Christian Lavers, who is apparently president of ECNL. What is needed to make youth soccer better can be very similar and very different to what pro soccer may need or want, or what the national team may need or want. He then goes on to say, you have a lot of very strong-willed, very opinionated people in American soccer. Go to Argentina and see what the opinions are of football in that country. Ask anybody. You're going to get a earful. Like these are such distractions from the actual problem. They then talk about the fragmentation of the youth system with the 54 state associations, like why California, Texas, New York, and Pennsylvania need 2 associations for one state. I have no idea, but this is a good point. Yes, again, these are all good points, but they don't get to the actual problem. And unfortunately, this reporter didn't actually ask about the actual problem. So they then touch on putting the player above winning, but they don't really get into any details. They briefly talk about IDPs, individual development plans, with no real detail. They then talk about a digital platform, which I don't know if they're talking about the program that is essentially meant for MLS Next, where they're taking this program that's going to somehow calculate what team played better, and that's how they're going to decide who wins. But if that's sort of putting the player first, again, I've done other videos on that. I don't believe that's really going to help much. And then they briefly talk about soccer education, which is always like a talking point where they talk about, we need to develop better coaches. And I do think that that's true. Do they need better coaching education? They certainly do. But again, if you were to put your priorities where, actual development means something, actual, winning on the field actually gets you something, you would develop better coaches just organically. You wouldn't have to develop, they talk about maybe having a coaching hub in every single state. Again, these are just putting Band-Aids over the bullet hole of a problem that there is no incentive. There's no promotion relegation, and there really are no true clubs in America. So what Matt Crocker's been doing is taking, I guess, this presentation across the country, and he's been showing different clubs, different state associations, kind of what his plan is, which there is no details on this plan really, other than, to put players first and a lot of rhetoric that we've heard before. And I really like this quote by Mike Kalina, who we've talked about before. He is the CEO of U.S. Club Soccer. He's also a U.S. Soccer board member, which I think is a total conflict of interest, but that's a story for another time. But this is a good quote. He says, "A presentation and a document is not a plan, and that's the issue. that they're just all this corporate talk that we've heard for honestly decades and no real implementation. You know, they talk about the predecessors, Ernie Stewart, Claudio Reyna. I like, again, Mike Colina, you know, talks about Claudio Reyna had a 123-page document, and everybody bought it, you know, hook, line, and sinker, and then it just disappeared. They end with, you know, a couple of quotes about things that this new regime has done, you know, including Matt Crocker, and they point to the unified youth calendar, you know, and I'm not sure, again, that this reporter, like, if I heard that, my question would be, well, the calendar's still not unified that we know of yet. Like, they did the age change, correct, but, you know, some leagues are going to do it, some leagues aren't. You know, we still don't know if MLS Next is going to make this age change. So what is this unified youth calendar that we're talking about, number one? The second thing, that they said they've done digital platforms. Well, I've yet to see this other than in kind of like videos saying it's going to happen. And even if they do implement that, that's for like the U13 or U14 MLS Next. That's a sliver of what is youth development or the youth soccer system in the country. And then the last thing they said is that he's been, you know, reaching out and building trust, which I guess is when, you know, you go around the country and give presentations, you know, and then that's the article, you know, and they talk about how hard it's going to be to do this. So there's really no substance to this, you know, and I'm just, you know, I'll end with saying these types of articles bother me because I don't think that this reporter is in the trenches of youth soccer like I am every day, number one. Number two, I'm really concerned that potentially Matt Crocker doesn't have a good grasp on what the problems are. Or if he does, he might not be interested in changing it. It is a systemic problem. Like, it's not one thing about, you know, oh, the country's too big or we don't have enough coaching education. The system is put in place for a reason. Like that's why it's there. And the only way to actually change and to actually see us develop more world-class talent, for example, you have to change the system and incentivize it to do that. But right now, in my opinion, the powers that be don't want to do it. So guys, let me know what you think. You know, I will link this, but again, it's under a paywall. Hopefully I've summarized it okay for you guys. Again, I'd love to hear the comments. I'd love to know what you think. You know, put them in the comments or reach out to me directly. See you guys on the next video.